All right. Hello and welcome to another Sketchy Talk. Today we have Wes Douglas joining us from Chicago, and I'm going to read a quick bio. Wes is a career art director, graphic designer who always has a tendency towards illustration graphics and rendered a lot of his concepts by hand. As a former business owner, he evolved his role as a concept artist to research company and participated in many brainstorming sessions. He's had the pleasure of illustrating two business books, Free the Idea Monkey and Plan D by G. Michael Maddox, and created a large number of speaker sketches explainer videos. Is that like the whiteboard things?
Yeah.
Which are like sketch notes on a larger scale. This led to leading a number of workshops at USK Chicago, and now he teaches urban sketching classes for the DuPage Art League. He has been drawing since he was small and feels like he's sketched in an urban sketching kind of way, just calling it sketching, and only drew from the imagination when his brother recreated war scenes in sketch form and later created new concepts. In 2013, he found Gabby Cabanero's book and thought of this style of on-location sketching was very interesting. Shortly after that, he joined USK chapter and showed up for his first sketch crawl and quickly was added as one of the admins. He was an admin for 8 years, and it felt cool to meet people from Facebook, and they were willing to share their tips and tricks. In 2017, the International Urban Sketchers Symposium came to Chicago, to the U.S. for the only second time, and he was honored to be selected as one of the sketch correspondents, which is a very exciting job, which we'll talk about. Being a sketch correspondent is a grueling activity when you lead a team of 3 responsible for capturing the feel of the symposium over 3 days. Wow, that's quite a lot of cool stuff. And actually, what you do sounds very similar. I have not listened to Tom's yet. I'm going to be putting it on YouTube tomorrow, but he also does a lot of sketch concepting for agencies and that sort of thing, where you sort of do live sketching while people brainstorm.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a lot of fun because, these people would blurt out ideas just off the top of their head. And my job was to capture it visually. And then they go, yeah, 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 yeah. And then they would keep building on it from there, so it kept the conversation going.
That's right. So you said you were kind of sketching before Urban Sketchers. How did you stumble upon them? Did you know a friend of Alex's? You said it kind of started out of, Alex and a couple of her friends sketching and started a chapter. How did you stumble on it?
It was because I picked up Gabby's book.
Okay.
The Art of Urban Sketching. And I found that in the library and I started flipping through it. And I thought it was very much like some of the other books that I had looked at, artistic journaling, this and that. And I thought, hey, this is kind of cool. And then I started getting towards the back of the book where it mentioned that there were chapters, different chapters in different cities. And so what I did is I said, looks like there's one in Chicago. So I looked up their Facebook group and I clicked on the button for join and they accepted me shortly after that. And I'm like, okay, cool. All right. I was already on Facebook. So I'll post my pictures towards this group. And I kept going. Next thing I know, they had these meetups. And the first meetup that I went to was in Chicago at the old Chicago Library, which is now called the Chicago Cultural Center. And it was minus 20.
Oh, my gosh.
And I took the train from the suburbs and then walked from the train station all the way to the Cultural Center. Couldn't have been a colder day for me to pick to join this group. And I
hope it was an indoor sketch.
It was definitely indoor, yeah. And once I got there and I started to meet some of the other artists, I said, this is great because at the end when we have a throwdown, which is tradition for urban sketching, it was really cool that we were all having discussions about what did you use? How did you get that effect? And people were sharing, which was alien to me because normally when you get around a group of artists, they hold it very close to the vest. Yeah, they don't share because it might be their livelihood they're giving away, but that's not how urban sketching community is. And so I thought I said, I think I found my happy place.
Yes, that is really cool. Do you still sketch with them often?
I sketch with them occasionally. Now that I teach a class on urban sketching, my community is more with the students that keep coming back for my classes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we pick a lot of suburban locations now.
Is the class online, like, or is it something anyone can take, or is it something in Chicago, like in person?
It's in person, and
Ah, okay.
it's in the suburbs. It's in Wheaton, which is a suburb of Chicago out in the west, and it a lot of some of my students have been part of Urban Sketcher in Chicago. And
Mm-hmm.
then they found my class, and then they thought it was much better because it was closer to where they lived,
Mm-hmm.
and they loved the one-on-one contact.
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to be coached by someone like me was what they needed. They needed
Mm-hmm.
that hands-on tutorial.
Well, that's the one thing. The Chicago metropolitan area is quite large. We have a illustrators lunch that meets every week in Cincinnati, and people in larger cities have said it's difficult to do something like that because the metropolitan area is so large. You try to do it in different areas, and then it ends up being very far for certain people to go. So I could see how that actually we overlap a lot with the Dayton chapter because Dayton's an hour away. And so, like, some areas are kind of between the two. So we get a lot of overlap between the two urban sketchers groups.
Yeah, we're starting to get that a lot now because Milwaukee. There's a
Mm-hmm.
Milwaukee Urban Sketchers chapter. There's Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm.
The people are coming from Michigan to join up with our group. And they have their own chapters. Now there's a West Michigan,
Oh,
um,
wow.
which is just around the bend on the other side of the Lake Michigan. So there's a lot of overlap, and yet it's all good, because everybody gets to try out different areas and
Mm-hmm.
meet different people.
And see the different architectures, and I mean, even well, I mean, people that are listening to this that aren't from sort of the Midwestern United States, each little city has its own flavor, really, of architecture and design, and that's what makes it so exciting.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a lot of fun, and I'm a big fan of lighthouses, so I'm happy to
Ooh,
go around Lake Michigan and chase lighthouse sketches.
I was noticing when I was compiling images for my book Sketching Here and Everywhere, I have a lot of lighthouse pictures.
Well, they're fascinating when you study
They
how
are.
they're made, and the whole Fresnel lens and all this kind of stuff. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
even Jimmy Buffett is fascinated with lighthouses.
I sketched a lot my brother lives in Long Island, and so one time when we were visiting there, we just drove to all the different lighthouses and I sketched them. And just of course any place where there's a large body of water, you see them. And the Great Lakes are pretty big. Obviously, they have lighthouses and actually are bodies of water for commerce and that sort of thing. So,
Yeah, I look for them all the time whenever I'm on the water, and that's the other thing I like about urban sketching is you get to live vicariously through other people's sketches
yes,
because they're in
exactly.
different areas.
It's really a neat way to look at the thing that I love about urban sketching also is that it's ubiquitous around the world. Like everybody has some sort of wherever their area is that they live, you see people enjoying it in that way. I mean, I don't want to say it's the great equalizer, but it shows that the commonalities between people more than the differences.
Yeah, certainly the talent level is universal, and it's so fun to see how it's interpreted and how it's used in different parts
Exactly.
of it. It makes the world a smaller place for sure.
Well, I was going to say that that's a good segue into when you were the correspondent at the Urban Sketchers Symposium. That was probably an interesting experience too, because that is truly a worldwide event where you get people from all over the world sketching.
It was fascinating because if an artist can geek out on celebrities in the art world, that was as close as I've ever come to it. I was meeting Mark Terrell Holmes. I was meeting Rob Sketcherman. I was meeting, Liz Steele. In fact, Liz Steele and I did a morning news program to promote urban sketching and that symposium. And so I got to spend time with her, and she asked me to just drive her around Chicago so that we could look at all the different architecture in the area. And one small little story with Liz Steele is that we went to WGN Studios, which is part of the Chicago Tribune, or it was at the time. And when we got there, she had mentioned to me she had never been on a TV set before, but she had designed several of them. So it was kind
Wow.
of funny that she had never been in front of the cameras, is what she meant. And so it was really kind of fun. And for me, WGN was a big part of my history because that's where the Bozo Circus show was filmed. I used to watch it as a kid, and here I was in the halls where they actually filmed it.
Oh, that's
They don't
cool.
do it anymore, but it was still kind of fun.
That's really cool. It was probably fun to see it's always fun to see the city through a visitor's eyes anyway and show it
Yeah.
off. I have some friends in Chicago, and when I visit there, they say it's exciting when you come because, like, I just think I just live here, and it's neat to see enthusiasm of tourists.
Yeah. The one of the fun things that happened when we were on the morning news is they had technical difficulties with another interview that they had for somebody who was promoting a book. And because they had all this extra time, they kept coming back to us. We were only supposed to have about 5 minutes of airtime. And I think by the time we were done, to help them fill dead spots in the air, they kept coming back to us. I think we were on the air for a total of 20 minutes.
Oh, wow. That's really, were you sketching too? Like, did they show you like in process doing some art or?
Yeah, what they had asked us to do was just sketch the studio while the broadcast was going on. So we sat over on the side, and they had cameras on us. They had cameras over our shoulders, and they would come back to us every so often after commercials, and they'd ask, "Okay, how you guys doing on the drawings?" And then we'd show them. And one of the guys, Dan Ponce, was one of the anchors. He made a comment which I thought was very interesting at the time, and he goes, I would think if you were an urban sketcher, he says, that being a courtroom artist would be like the top echelon of being an urban sketcher. He goes, would you guys want to be, courtroom artists? And I'm thinking we're in a newsroom, and he's probably got an in, right? Because
Oh,
it's
yeah,
normal.
yeah.
It's normally the news agencies that hire courtroom artists. I'm like, you got any? you know?
And what did they say? Did they have any leads?
No, not at the
Uh,
time. But he was just trying to assimilate to what we were doing and how it applied to his world of the news and journalism.
well, it's interesting. I do know a courtroom sketcher in Cincinnati, Marlene Steele, and she does teach urban sketching classes as well.
Oh, nice.
And so it probably is a similar, I mean, I suppose that's almost raw reportage or something, when you're actually in a courtroom drawing. And she uses, I mean, she tends to use a lot of pastel and color pencil and stuff. And that's one thing that's interesting. All sketchers have different materials that they like to use. I mean, I know a lot of people that do plein air, and a lot of that tends to be done in oil paints or whatever, and I like having more smaller materials and easier to handle materials.
Yeah.
Quick stuff that you have, like ballpoint pens are wonderful with a little sketchbook. What are your favorite tools? Actually, this is a good segue into that. Like
Oh,
when
my,
you're sketching, do you just keep your sketchbook in your pocket, and do you have a little one you carry around everywhere, or?
I have a little pocket one that I carry around, and my favorite size is about a 6x9 spiral notebook. And I don't love the fact of spiral notebooks that there's a big gutter in the middle that you can't draw across, but I love the spiral binding because that's where I keep my pen
Oh,
attached
smart.
attached to my sketchbook. So then I'm never without, like, I don't have to keep it in my pocket or anything like that. So I like to keep my sketchbook. Since you can see me, I'm going to show you. This is one of them, because it has the sketchbook and it has the spiral binding. I usually carry those around, but I've often I love the Stillman and Burns and the
Mm-hmm.
Hahnemuhle type of sketchbooks. The Perfect Bound.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's mostly what I get.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you can draw right across the gutter
Mm-hmm.
or the seam there, and it's a wonderful experience when you can stretch your canvas a little further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the little 5.5 by 5.5, I think is the size. The little hardbound ones that global. It's a handbook. I think that's Global Artist Materials or something is the name of and that's one of my favorite ones because it's a nice size for your purse.
Yeah, I mean, there's Moleskin, and then there's
Yes.
Field Notes are wonderful little pocket size and
Hmm.
very portable size books that you can get. Um, and normally, what I do is I try to carry one book and one pen with me. I've been trying to coach my students, because they normally carry watercolor sets around or
Hmm.
full
Hmm.
marker sets and stuff like that. I'm like, be portable, because sometimes you have to just grab and go.
Hmm.
Just give
Hmm.
yourself all you really need is a pen and a sketchbook or something to draw on. So sometimes I'll have just a Sharpie, an
Hmm.
ultra Sharpie with me, or
I love Sharpie. I mean, I love their pilot style pen. Their fine tip pens. I use them
yeah,
all the time. All of Sharpie's pens are great.
yeah, and I also use this Pilot Razor.
Hmm.
That's always kind of nice. I do use Micron once in a while. Um, I don't have as many of those floating around as I thought I did, uh, but I've also used ballpoint pens that I've stolen from hotels. So
Oh, no, that's even. I mean, I tend to use the really cheap Bic pens,
yeah.
but the ballpoint that gives it more style and flair if you've got ones from hotels, I think.
What's cool about a ballpoint is if you give it a very light touch, it's very much like a pencil, except it
Yes.
doesn't smudge. And then you can really bear down on it and get a nice black line or
Hmm.
full color like you'd like. My favorite now is a four-color Bic pen.
Yeah, you were mentioning that when we were talking to Jacksonville last week, and that seems really like a good idea. I had to get one of those.
It's really cool because you can use it for cross hatching, and then you can overlay the different colors and get extra colors.
Hmm. That's right. So I'm going to move back a little bit because we haven't really talked about this. You kind of work your day job as an artist too. What is your background? Is it design or did you go to school for art? And how did you get to the career path that you are now?
That's a really good question. I always loved drawing as a little kid. I loved drawing. I think my dad started me out with my very first concertina sketchbook by bringing home a pad of that green and white striped computer paper,
Oh,
and
we
it
used to
just,
draw on that stuff too. Our neighbor worked at Kenner and used to bring back all the computer printouts for us to draw on.
yeah, you could panorama. You can go forever on those things. You just go from one page to the next page, and then you got this fold out mural. Um, so that's what I started out with. And then eventually I started to get sketchbooks. I would draw anything. My dad put one of those warehouse pallets, those skids,
Hmm.
up in the tree. And that was my first sketching treehouse. But getting back to your real question is I was self-taught as an artist all the way until I got to high school, where I started to take art classes. Um, and I really liked sketching and I liked drawing. And I heard about something called commercial art at the time. Commercial art became graphic design. And, with all the adults that would tell you the only way you're going to make money as an artist is to be dead. And I was like, okay, I need to find something that I can do as a livelihood. And so commercial art seemed like one of those things. And the more I learned about it, the more I liked graphic design. So I went to school for graphic design, and I had a real liking for three-dimensional objects. Similar to you with your product design, I really liked designing packaging because you could turn it around, you could touch it, you could feel it. It kind of played into all the model building I did as a kid. My first job was a graphic designer for a packaging firm. I didn't get to design packages so much as, the structure of it, as much as I got to design the graphics that were on the package, mostly snack food bags and bread wrappers and
Oh,
candy
that's just
wrappers.
fun. Yeah, I that was my first job, was designing stuff like that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I learned about color separation, and we were in a studio where we actually made the comps, the mock-ups that
Uh-huh.
were perfect. We would also test out the different plates before
Hmm.
we put it in our sister company's presses. It was a Flexo press
Oh,
up in,
yes, yes. Yeah, flexographic printing. Yeah.
yeah, up in Milwaukee. So we would do the proofs that the
Hmm.
clients would approve before we got in, on press. And some of those mock-ups I'd have to make into snack food bags or candy bars. And so you had to kind of learn through almost an origami style. You had to learn how to fold the package so that it had like a pillow look to it.
So were you in the era of paste up, or did you
Yeah.
start? Okay.
Yeah, I was this was 84, so
Oh, so
the
so you were there at paste up.
yeah, key lime paste up and rubylith and all this kind
I
of
don't
fun
miss
stuff.
any of those things. Stat
Yeah, yeah.
machines. Oh.
We were just predating the Apple Macintosh, so
Hmm.
all that wonderful programming that Apple gave us was not quite available yet. So
Yes, I mean, it was sort of, it's interesting because packaging sort of went through a change in the late 80s, early 90s, and there were so many places that their whole job was to make films for color separations. And when I think of all those businesses that are gone now, I mean, the way they make plates is totally different now than how they did
yeah,
back then.
yeah, they used to take transparencies that a photographer, would, and they'd wrap it on a drum, and then they would scan it on the drum. And I mean, there was some great things that you used to be able to do. And something that I certainly don't miss is having to count out my type to
Oh,
figure out
yes.
to figure out if it was going to fit in a certain space.
Yes, I mean, it certainly has changed the whole way, like typesetting and actually having to print out linotype machines and then paste up that stuff. I don't miss any of those things, but it's kind of an interesting, it's interesting how much that has changed. It was interesting. There was a Facebook meme a couple of years ago, and talking about crazy conspiracy theories. Somebody said, when you see a bread bag with the black square, and they were saying the different color squares meant different things, and it was my mom that posted it, and she's usually not someone that goes in for conspiracy theories. I was like, Mom, that's for the colors on the press, and that's also so the machine knows where to cut it.
Yeah,
I said it
yeah,
has nothing to do with the content of the package or anything. I said,
no,
as a former package designer, it's just for the little guide light to know where to cut it.
yeah,
But
yeah.
but
The
this
high spot.
conspiracy, yeah, this conspiracy theory was like, oh, it has some sort of chemical in it or something. And I said, no, that's not what it is.
That's how rumors get started. Yeah.
I said that's just the equipment so it knows what to do. And there still is flexographic printing and that sort of thing. I don't, and it's just, I think, done a bit differently now.
Yeah, I wonder what your mom would say about QR codes.
Exactly. That's the next conspiracy.
That's right. It's stealing your brain. Yeah.
Well, it was just sort of an interesting thought that something that we were used to seeing on packages and stuff like that, people would misinterpret what it was, but that just shows you how suspicious everybody is of everything.
Yeah, yeah.
that they would think that it had some sort of nefarious purpose rather than, a mechanical one.
Yeah.
And it was, I always thought that was interesting because even today, I think those printers that print like food bags and stuff, like was it Print Pack? Did you work with them? Like some of those big presses, and they get mad when they have to turn them off. They run pretty much 24/7.
Yes, because it's they're losing money when
Mm-hmm.
it's not running. And we actually didn't go with print pack, but we had our own printer, and
Mm-hmm.
we heard a lot of the same discussions. It's like if we hold up the presses, that was paramount. You don't hold up those presses, so we
Mm-hmm.
worked deadlines in order to make sure that those things were always going. That was our priority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of different. Well, I don't think it's probably any different now because they still print out that much packaging. It's probably just all digital plates and stuff, though. They or
Yeah.
digital printing. I'm not totally sure what uh what they use, what the process is these days, but it's still pretty fascinating.
Well, my day job, I actually work at a label printer, and
Mm-hmm.
it's digital press is the way to go, and hybrid, so they can actually blend flexography with digital. And the beauty of digital is that you can change on the fly. You can
Mm-hmm.
change the artwork just based on the digital files. That's how sequential packaging can be done too. Where you have the numbers printed right on the package, and each one has a unique number. They can do that by having digital presses that will be able to change that information
Oh,
as
that's
as
pretty
as
cool.
it's running. So
So when you do sketch concepting for agencies, is that freelance work or is that part of your day job as well?
it was part of my previous day job. So from 1991 up until last couple of years ago, I I start. I was one of the co-founders of a business called Maddock Douglas with G. Michael Maddock, and we started as a design studio where we did a lot of packaging because I was using some of the same skill sets from my previous job to design for some of those newer clients that we had, snack food packaging and coffee packaging and things like that. And then we started to do more design work and logo designs and brochures and catalogs. And then we started to do some concept work for Leo Burnett. And we were invited to their brainstorming sessions, and we started to like being able to be in those kind of meetings where it was at the very genesis of a project where people were just throwing out ideas, and I was brought in as the sketch artist. I'd just scribble as fast as I could. It was very much like a game of Pictionary, where
Mm-hmm.
somebody would say something like this, and I would sketch as fast as I could what my best guess at what they're talking about, and they would go, "That's perfect." And I'm thinking to myself, I'm making apologies to my sketch. I know I can draw much better than this, but they didn't care. To them, it was just enough scribble that it continued the conversation, and they were able to keep going from there. So I would go into the next scribble from there. And eventually we started to do that for our own clients. So we kind of evolved from a design studio to an advertising agency. And eventually, long around 2000, we were on the early stages of this thing called innovation, which at now is an overused term that doesn't mean what it did way back when it first came out. Uh, Innovation was all blue sky at the time. It's like, oh, big thinking, right? Big
Mm-hmm.
blue sky
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And then it became like eventually innovation was, you see trucks on the side of the street that say innovation plumbing. Like, how is that? Or innovation.
Where's the innovation there?
Yeah, yeah. So I would often question that, and sometimes just flavor extensions on a food item would be an innovation. We guess what? We mixed peanut butter and guacamole, and that would be the innovation. So we were doing at that point when we were doing innovation, we were doing a lot more brainstorming sessions, and I
Mm-hmm.
was doing a lot of those kind of sketches in those brainstorming sessions. And then the what I called speaker sketches, which are those sketch notes at a large scale.
Mm-hmm.
I would be off in the corner of a conference. So somebody would be on stage talking, they'd be showing their PowerPoint slides, and I would be capturing highlights from their presentation. So it was really kind of fun to be able to a lot of times these speeches, I probably would be falling asleep if I was in the audience. But the fact that I had to listen and I was listening for keywords that I could either capture as a picture
Mm-hmm.
or just a few words, the whole thing about sketch noting and graphic recording, as they called it, was fascinating to me. So that's kind of my evolution. It's started out, just scribbling observations from the marketplace, and eventually somebody's presentation on stage into speaker notes.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty interesting. And so now you said the type of stuff that you're doing is sort of, what did you say the type of stuff you're doing now is?
Well, now I work at a label printer,
That's right.
and,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm putting together a lot of artwork. What I really like, what I really liked about this is that number one, I was learning Adobe Illustrator, which I always thought I knew, but
Mm-hmm.
now working with it to set up files for
Mm-hmm.
print, I'm learning so much more about the kind of things I studied way back when I was in school studying printing. So I really liked Illustrator. But the other thing that it really got me to do was I was learning a whole new set of skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I now know what it feels like to learn a new skill or a new technique. So when I'm teaching my classes, I know what many of my students feel like when
Mm-hmm.
they don't grasp one of the concepts that I'm trying to teach them when it comes to urban sketching, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's perspective or putting something in, start with something in a box, as I always like to say, start with a box and then
Mm-hmm.
put your object inside the box.
Mm-hmm.
So concepts like that we're still alien to them, but because of my having to learn a whole new set of skills for this printer, I knew what it felt like. So I was able to put myself in their shoes literally and be able to kind of calibrate my teaching so
Mm-hmm.
that they could better understand it rather than me just, you know, anytime, for example, anytime you hear discussions about perspective, what do you always hear? Horizontal line, vanishing points, and perspective lines. And everybody's like, yeah, that's great, but I'm looking across the street at that building over there. I don't understand what you're talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just kind of fun to be able to say, okay, let's scrap all that and start over from scratch, and then be
Mm-hmm.
able to let's make sure that you understand this like you've never understood it before. That's my
That's
always been a
interesting because that's kind of what I have actually in the chapter where I talk about urban sketching in the book. That was one of the things I talked about was perspective, because really what you should draw whether you're drawing, I compare it to drawing a still life, and that what you really need to look at is the negative space and the relationships of the negative space to the overall form, rather than saying I'm going to draw this and draw points into it, because I mean you may make a facsimile of what you see, but if you're really trying to draw what you see, it's actually looking more at negative space and how that works in relationships over sort of drawing, like you said, the horizon line and all of that stuff. And so I'm glad other people kind of point that out too. And the thing about drawing in a box, that was always what they said in industrial design when sketching product, is draw the box first.
Yeah, I found that it applies to everything, even if you're drawing a cylindrical garbage
Mm-hmm.
can or a
Oh,
fire
totally.
hydrant.
Yes.
Because all those ellipses if you look straight down at it, are circles, and those all fit in a square, and then be able to tilt it at an angle, it turns into this
Exactly.
oval shape. And so that's kind of fun things that I have discussions with my class now, and it is fun to discover together how we can break the mold on how to figure this out so that they can see it for the first time.
Exactly, exactly. So, talking about your sketching practice, you were talking about your Urban Uglies collection, which I'm really interested in talking about that before we finish here. Is that part of your regular practice now? You said you find things that most people would say, I wouldn't draw that. Is that kind of the essence of what this is?
That's exactly what it is. It's there, that old cliche about stop and smell the roses.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of took that and I said, stop and notice what everybody else is trying to ignore or trying to look past, or just, somehow they don't acknowledge that these things exist. And those things can be as simple as an HVAC unit on the back of their apartment, or fire hydrants and dumpsters and garbage cans and fire hydrants and gas meters and things like that. Those are all designed by some engineer, and they are
Exactly.
designed in such a beautiful way that they function perfectly for many, many years. And yet we think of it as, oh, that's ugly, right? But I I started by sketching cars that were in an accident, not still in an accident, but usually they're towed to some garage or some junkyard, and it's a mashed up piece of car. And the wrinkles in the metal I found so fascinating, even when the car was ours,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
right? I was somehow, in a weird way, I was somehow be able to detach myself emotionally and just look at it as a messy thing. And it's one of those things where you look at it and you go, no, I just want to, I want to ignore it. But somehow when you sketch it, it becomes this beautiful piece of art. And it also gets other people to look at that thing that they were ignoring all these years
Mm-hmm.
differently. All of a sudden they're like, oh, I never saw it that way before. There's a book that I've been reading called Be an Explorer of the World by Carrie Smith, I think is her name. And it's this wonderful little book where you literally will walk through and notice everything around you as if you have a beginner's mind, or
Mm-hmm.
as if you're a tourist that's in this place for the first time. What are the kind of things that you look at? What are the kind of things you notice that you don't notice when they become super familiar to you?
It seems like most of the stuff in your surroundings you ignore, really.
Yeah.
As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, the way the brain processes things, it doesn't see everything. I mean, I guess it couldn't. There's so much stuff around, your brain can't take in everything. And so they said actually, like if you pull your car out of the driveway or whatever, those are like packets of memory. Like your brain isn't processing all of that stuff. And I think that's true of a lot of these things you're sketching. Your brain just totally ignores them.
And to have a sketchbook with you allows you to capture it at the moment that you notice it. Because if you say to yourself, I'll come back to that later, it won't be the same. The lighting will be different. Your experience will be different.
Exactly.
There's something about when you saw it at that moment in time. Sometimes it's while you're driving a car and you're like, I got to come back to that. No. So, but to be able to capture it in a sketch means a whole lot more because, and I think I've heard you say this on your previous podcast, the more time you spend with the drawing, the more invested you are in that subject because
Mm-hmm.
you've spent time on it versus picking up your phone or your camera and going click.
Mm-hmm.
That short amount of time, you're like, great, I got a picture, and it goes in your file and you may forget about it because you have all these other files, all these other photos in that same collection.
Yes, you aren't take it, it lets you slow down and take in something in a
Yeah.
way that when you sit down and sketch it, it's a more in-depth exploration of the environment around you, and it's surprising. Even someplace that, like sitting in your doctor's office, which is usually a pretty bland experience, but when you sit down and look, then you notice, oh well, there's all these shelves with magazines, and they have toys here for the kids to play with, and plants and all this different stuff.
I tell my students all the time, keep looking around you for the things
Mm-hmm.
that are going to, that you may take for granted, that you're going, that
Mm-hmm.
it may surprise you, with the amount of beauty that they have. And whenever I catch myself doing that very thing, like in a doctor's office, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
they take out a lot of very interesting things. It's very bland, as you mentioned. And so if I start to say to myself, nah, I don't feel it, I have to ask myself why. Why don't I feel it? And start looking for reasons rather than just like I'm being lazy and I don't feel like drawing right now.
Mm-hmm. So how often do you try to draw every day, or with your practice, how do you?
Yeah. So I I have heard many times people say you got to pick up a pencil and like 10 minutes a day, your morning routine,
Mm-hmm.
your evening routine before you go to bed or something like that. That for me, that hasn't worked very well because um, I'll tell you, I think it's because I always want the picture to stand for something, to mean something. And I don't do a lot of, probably because I've been drawing my whole life. I don't draw a lot of still life on my desk just to
Mm-hmm.
be able to draw. I trust in my ability to draw at this point. So now what I do is I look for the stories that it can tell. If
Mm-hmm.
if the pens and pencils that are laying on my desk are in such a way that they can tell a story, then I'll probably sketch it. But it's kind of funny. I think all the time I should be drawing every day, and yet I don't. Probably because I'm busy with that other job, thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I spend a lot of time now because I'm teaching. I spend a lot of time dreaming up what other ways can I teach this concept in a more awesome way. You
Oh,
know,
cool.
so my sketchbooks now, if you look at them, are probably when I was younger, my sketchbooks were probably 80% sketches. Everything was sketches. And now, if you look at my sketchbooks, they're about 75% lists and notes of ideas of what I'm going to teach or how I'm going to
But I
teach. And
think that that's an aspect of journaling too. I think that that's a good thing. Putting lists, and I mean, I sometimes doodle stuff, concept sketches and ideas for cartoons and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of different. I mean, your sketch, that's one thing that's fun about it. It doesn't have to be like a portfolio piece.
that's what you have to remind yourself. And certainly when you look, you go to YouTube or TikTok or whatever, and you
Mm-hmm.
see somebody doing their sketchbook reveal, they lay the thing down and they start flipping through, and every picture is awesome. And you're like, my sketchbooks don't look like that because they're scribbles, they're doodles, they're half thoughts, or they're observations from when I'm
Mm-hmm.
shopping at the store.
Yeah, and I think that's what I like. I like seeing a mix of stuff like that, because it's really sort of a way for you to remember. I mean, sometimes it's a way to remember a place that you're at, or if you see something like that would make a good sketch for your Urban Uglies collection or something, like make notes of it and that sort of thing. Say, what address is this? And
Yeah, in when we had Maddox Douglas, whenever we had younger designers come in to work for us, and they were already used to working on a Mac, they
mm-hmm.
would we'd set them off on a project, and they would go and work up all these designs on the computer. and we would tell them, go back and sketch it out. Sketch it out on paper first, because what they were giving us when they worked on computer is all the tricks that they already knew how to do. And so we thought, if they go and sketch their idea first, and then they have to force the Mac to figure out how to recreate what they did, all the energy of a sketch, that was going to be probably more breakthrough than them just going and saying, okay, I know how to do this because we did this in class, or we did this in school or something like that.
You kind of get trapped in a rut, really, if you
you
like
have
your
your
favorite
go-to
fonts
moves.
and you have it's sort of it becomes routine.
Yes, yeah. So we found that the designs were much better when they had to show us their sketches, because we also saw how they thought. When they went right to computer, we didn't get to see all the edits they made, the thinking, the evolution of an idea.
Well, that's one of the things, and I mentioned this in the talk last week. That's why I developed all these sketch exercises for quick sketching, and we do a lot of stuff with prompts. So that's not really urban sketching, it's just sketching. But I found when I have people timed, like when I time them for like 5 minutes, the stuff I'd get, even the students that said they weren't sketchers and didn't draw that well, like the stuff I got out of them was so much more interesting and had so much more life than when I would send them home and say, do 5 sketches for me by Monday or something. The stuff I would get was way worse than what they did in the 5 minutes. And I don't know why that is. I think it's because when you're doing something like that to a timer, you're just sort of reacting and it's more of a flow. Whereas if I told you to do 5 book cover sketches and you came back, then you kind of agonize over it. Whereas if it's like 5 minutes, draw a book cover for whatever, whatever book, for Watership Down or something. And like, then you would be more thinking composition and whole picture rather than sketching a little rabbit and spending 2 hours on it.
Yeah. And I thought your point too about how, was it you who drew The Hobbit before the movie was made?
Yes. That was, well, before the Peter Jackson movies. I mean, the Bakshi movies were out when we were doing that.
Yeah.
I don't think that had infected the cultural vision of what those books looked like the same way.
I often think that's a great exercise to take something like The Wizard of Oz, a book, a story that people are well aware of. They've already seen the movie. They've already seen the different illustrated books. But to come in and say, okay, let me take this and see if I could put a fresh spin on The Wizard of Oz. You have to fight through all those cliches. You have to fight through, and then go back to the story itself and pull different references out of it.
Yeah, it's extremely hard not to do stuff in cliche, with a lot of tropes, because if it strays too far from what the, sort of collective view of what that is, they may not recognize what it is. It's like a fine line, like between, I want to do something that's really different, but will they know what this different is? And that it's an interesting exercise for sure.
Yeah, you come up with something like The Wiz.
Exactly, which was a really good innovation on that story.
Yeah.
But there was somebody, I read an article that they were talking about designing book covers, and they said when they first started working and designing book covers, they wanted to do something different that had never been done for science fiction genre book covers. But when they did that, the people that usually read science fiction didn't pick them up because they didn't look like science fiction book covers. So it's kind of like, from a marketing standpoint, how do you break these? And you probably remember years ago, the Tropicana packaging. You remember what happened when they redesigned it and they wanted it to be more airy, and they took their really pretty illustration of the orange off and made it more, what would you say, clean and simple?
Yeah.
And
the appetite appeal went away.
Yes. People didn't buy it because it looked like a cheap brand then.
There's a current a current brand that's going through that same thing right now. Paul Newman's own.
Oh, uh-huh.
Um, so the for many years, it's always been a sketch of Paul Newman with all these vegetables and all illustrated vegetables around him and a farmland behind him and everything like that. And in the newest version, they took away all the farmland and they kind of simplified it down, pared it down to just a new illustration of Paul Newman. He's in a chef's coat. I don't know what the technical term for the chef's coat, with the turtleneck.
Yeah.
And they took away all the fruits and vegetables, and there wasn't the appetite appeal. Oh, and they changed the font so that it didn't look quite so woodcut.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have to look at it.
I'm going to do a search on this now because that's really it's so did they actually drop sales?
No, but I remember it created quite a flurry of discussion in the design world,
Mm-hmm.
and not even design. It was on LinkedIn, and there were a whole bunch of people who were like, "Nah, I don't think so." And what you find is when you make big changes like that,
Mm-hmm.
you run into a good percentage of people that are just simply change adverse. They just don't like change
There
at
is
all.
that too.
And then there's the other part that's like, well, I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it more printable or more web friendly or something like that, by taking all the detail out of it, but it loses some of that tactile quality that the original had.
That's the big tricky part about graphic design is you want it to be clean and readable. But if it gets too generic, then it no longer reads as a premium brand. So how do you keep both of those things? And I don't totally know what the answer to that is, but it's an interesting conundrum. I mean, and a lot of it is probably you have to view it in all these different ways, and it definitely is and also competing against so many different packages. Sort of,
Yeah.
how do you make your package stand out in a storefront is really a complex question. But I'll have to definitely look that up. And speaking of design and stuff, you said you were going to start dipping your toes into the Procreate world.
Yes.
So you said you're getting an iPad this weekend?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm ready to pull the trigger on it.
Have you worked with it yet?
I've worked with one. It was an iPad 2, so I played around with it. And the stylus was not the Apple Pencil; it was that blunt
Oh
pencil.
yes, I know what you're talking about. It's like almost like an eraser, like a squishy sort of thing.
Yeah, squishy eraser, or it's a fabric wrapped pencil, or it's like drawing with a pencil eraser, and that was pretty cool. What I had to think about, why did I really want an iPad? Because I have so much fun in my sketchbooks, to hear the marker or the pencil squeaking and scratching on the paper.
It's very tactile.
Yes. So why would I want to give that up? Or, the wonderful smell of markers, so, and I thought about it and I said, well, one of the things I really like that I have seen come out of Procreate and other programs like that is the playback videos.
Those are really cool.
When you can see how a drawing is done. I mean, I miss that part of it, and I'm not always in a position to put my camera in a holder right above my drawing tablet or my sketchbook and draw, because sometimes I'm out in the field. I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Hold with one hand and sketch with the other.
My husband got me a GoPro style camera for Christmas that you can attach it to your head.
There you go.
The only snag with that is that I did a test. You almost need to put it when you're drawing, when it's on your head, the camera moves a little bit too much. You need to have it on something more stable, or it's hard to watch.
Yeah, I have seen Mike Dykabara put some things over his shoulder or attach
an exoskeleton of
cameras. He's got a bendable neck that attaches to his drawing board, and holds his camera or his phone right over the top of that. So there are all kinds of different iterations. None of them seem all that natural to me, but they're really good for, like, what Mike was using it for was to be able to project onto an iPad what he was doing, so that people who were looking over his shoulder could look at the iPad and follow along if they couldn't
Oh, that's smart.
see over his shoulder, because of
Oh,
the
that's
crowd.
interesting. That's an interesting way to approach it. I mean, I think Procreate is a very intuitive, especially if you've worked in Photoshop and Illustrator, it's very intuitive to use. And for people that have never used Photoshop, because I forget how complicated Photoshop can be until I'm teaching it. And then I'm saying, oh, well, you take this drop down menu, and then there's another drop down menu, and then you drop down another one, and that's where it is, and I don't think about it at all when I'm doing it. But when you're explaining it to someone else, you're like, oh, well, this is a little more complicated than.
Yeah. I don't imagine that an iPad is going to replace my sketchbook out in the field, because the harsh sunlight makes it really hard to see.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like I said, those playback videos I'm really fascinated with, and I really like some of the other work that I've seen come out of there. Especially when you can make edits to your drawing, or to be able to layer opaque colors on top of darker colors. When you are working with markers, you have to think in reverse. You have to think, okay, leave page white if you want white there, unless you want to use a gel pen to replace it. So you have to think differently about how you're going to layer your drawing versus an iPad. And probably I'm thinking it's 2023, Wes. Come on.
Well, like I said, I love using my Cintiq, and I use it a lot to illustrate. I have done. I mean, I just did a class demo last week where I was sketching on my iPad, and you get really nice results on the iPad, and you get a very natural pencil. I ended up, since I draw on the Cintiq so much, when I'm out, I just like the analog feeling like you described, with the pencil and using the materials and playing with it in that sort of traditional way. And I mean, it all just depends on what your preferences are. A lot of people love sketching on the iPad. So I think that it's, it just depends if you like it. I still am not sure. Like, I find it a little bit, and possibly it's just learning how to use the tools to get them to do what you want to do from an urban sketching standpoint. I mean, the master obviously is Rob Sketcherman, and he does such amazing work in keeping it loose and everything.
Yeah, the nice thing about the iPad that I've noticed too is, and I thought about an iPad for doing those sketch notes that I talked about. Where you're trying to cram in a lot of pictures and a lot of words on a longer presentation. And the fact that you can take two fingers and make it bigger. Yes. Right. So now you can zoom in on an area and fit in all that type, and then zoom back out and still have context for how much space you're going to fill.
That is one of the advantages when you draw on the iPad, is if you take up too much space, you can make it littler.
Yeah. Right. So I figured it's the best of both worlds. I don't know.
Just make sure you save everything. I'm sure they tell you that.
Yes.
Make sure that you save it in someplace other than the gallery that comes with Procreate, like whether you put it into Google Drive or something like that, just so it's somewhere else. If it does, I've had a couple friends whose iPads died and they lost everything.
Yeah, I'm like that with my phone. I get everything off that phone if I can, as soon as possible. So then when I go to, you're having dinner with the family and you want to show them the latest thing you did, or something you did a month ago, I'm like, oh, I guess I already took it off the phone.
Oh, wow. So you're like that's pretty hardcore if you remove them that fast.
Yeah, I guess I've had enough times where it says, you're running out of space. Do you want to buy more space? And me being a frugal would be like, no.
Exactly. I mean, actually have bought all the space. Like I think I have 2 terabytes on everything. Although I built you know, and this is when you've had a career this long, the amount of like books and stuff you start having, how you archive your digital work is a big deal. And so a friend of mine built an array drive for me a couple of years ago, and it has 32 terabytes and it's almost full.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I guess I need to build another one. And it's like, how do you back up this stuff? And some of it goes back to the 90s, what's the long-term storage solution for this stuff?
Yeah.
And I'm not organized enough to make huge amounts of sense. I mean, I have a lot of, I still lose stuff.
Well, yeah, and then and because you do a lot of illustrations for the books that you do, sometimes it's fun to go back and find the onion skins of your first drawings. As
Oh
you were
yeah, I
starting to,
have a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
so then you're kind of like, yeah, that it wouldn't be the same if I looked it up digitally. It's like you hear that rattling of the paper.
Oh, I forgot to mention the sets of flat files I have in my house and bins of sketches from over the year. I mean, that was one thing I think I was discussing with Tom in the last show, is that I no longer, like, when I do sketches for books, I still sketch for the books for the most part in pencil, and it's just habit. It's just I compile them digitally, but I sketch it. And I used to, when I first got out of school, I used to use expensive marker paper to sketch on, like the Canson paper or the Graphics 360 paper. And now I just use stacks of printer paper and just sketch on that.
Same here. I made sketchbooks out of copier paper.
Oh, it's quite adequate. It's very good.
Yeah, especially if you get the coated paper that goes through color copiers. It's got that finish to it, so that it holds up nicely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't need to buy expensive papers to.
Yeah, yeah.
To
Do we have time for me to ask you questions, or is it? Can I
Oh,
flip the script?
I was thinking we probably should wrap it up. What was the question that you had for me?
Well, it was you made an excellent comment on your Jacksonville,
Uh-huh.
and you said for people who want to draw for storybooks, you said draw stuff you like in storybook form, and my thought was, when you do that, do you always leave room for type intentionally in your drawing, or do you let the designer figure out where they're going to slug in the story?
I usually, if the designer has not provided a PDF for me, which sometimes the designer will do a rough layout of the type, and I will put it in my in a layer, because a lot of times I design I'll do thumbnails of the book of how I think a spread should look, and then I sketch different elements and tend to work in layers digitally. So I tend to sketch in pencil and then scan them in and then move them around and sort of design the illustration that way, which people
Okay.
used to do with tracing paper. Before computers, people used to put all the elements on tracing paper and move it around and then copy it and draw over it and that sort of thing. So this is really an updated version of that. And so I definitely try to leave room for text. Sometimes I still have to edit the illustration at the end, because even though the best intention was, and I had, once the color artwork goes in, then you have to be really cognizant of how the type's going to go over it.
Yeah.
I mean, it doing illustration for books and comics, you have to be very aware, especially comics with word balloons and all of that stuff. There's so much design element that you have to work in well compositionally. I always recommend people that want to go into illustration that illustration and design should probably be a co-major. I don't think you can be an illustrator and have no knowledge of design.
Yeah, yeah. At least a general awareness of good composition.
Yeah, I think because it's, and the designer's another artist too. You have to let them have their vision. especially if you're working with an art director or something like that. I mean, that's a whole other discussion as you described, commercial art. That's what it is, and how to make it so it's readable. And a lot of times with children's books, they have to be held up, because a lot of times you're reading the book like this, you're looking over, and so the kids have to be able to see the illustrations from far away. And there's a lot of different aspects to different types of books.
Yeah, why don't they do that? Why don't they put the type upside down when
that's interesting.
because the kid isn't going to read along.
Exactly. That's true. Well, you probably could do that in the e-versions of books, where you could turn the type any way that you wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different ways to do that stuff now. It's really fascinating. But, as far as storytelling, I mean, that's something you can do in your sketchbook too. And I'm sure you do it. I mean, that's what the sketch correspondent is almost. You were almost doing a sequential story about the symposium.
Yeah. Did I leave enough time to talk about that?
Yeah, you can talk about it. Sure. It's not like we've run out of time.
So there were 36 workshops in, for the symposium. There were 3 correspondents. Yes. We had to cover all 36. So we had to divide and conquer. That means we had 18 workshops to cover per day, one Saturday, one Sunday, plus all the other activities that went on, sketch crawls and dinners and, get-togethers and all these other things. We had to really capture as much of the feeling of being there for any of the urban sketchers in the global community who could not make it to Chicago, in our case.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had worked this out amongst the 3 of us, and I said, okay, who do you want to go sit in, and they're like, oh, I definitely want to go see Lapine, or I want to go see Paul Heaston, or I want to go see, and so everybody picked their favorite. And I said, okay, good. That means you get to cover the West region, any of the workshops over here on the west side of Chicago. And Vincent, you're going to cover the north side. It was Belize and Vincent and myself. And then I said, I'll cover the south half, anything, from the river south, so which they covered a lot of ground. So we had a lot of ground to cover. And I think it worked it out to be, we could spend no more than a half an hour for each workshop. So
wow.
That's a fast
now, does
sketch.
Does that include getting to the workshop? Like you would get there in half an hour, or it was just include time walking there or sprinting there?
Sprinting. And in my case, I got one of those push scooters.
Oh, nice. Smart.
I probably should have just rented one of the
Segways?
One of the bikes. Just cruised around that way. I would have covered a lot more ground faster, but it was certainly a challenge in trying to figure out. So you had a lot of ground to cover, because none of the workshops were close together. They were always a good 2 miles apart in many cases. And so by the time we got through all this stuff, you get to the end of the day. Now you get to scan all of your drawings and post them to the global website,
which takes almost as long as
the
drawing did.
And for Belize and Vincent, they were staying in Chicago. I was going back to the suburbs, back home, so I took the half-hour train ride, and I was kind of planning my strategy. By the time I got home, I jumped in front of my computer and started scanning away, and then, managed to wolf down a sandwich or something like that, go to sleep, get back up next day, come back down to the city.
Wow, that sounds intense.
Yeah, it was like if sketching or urban sketching is any kind of an athletic event, that was it.
It's like the decathlon sketching event.
And we were kind of famous for that, because everybody would see the pictures on the website and they go like, oh, I've seen this, that we were in that workshop, and people really appreciated getting a sense of what it's like to be in a symposium.
Oh, that's really cool. That sounds like an amazing experience. I mean,
I really liked it. You know, plus I had the publicity arm that I had to take care of too for the symposium,
mm-hmm.
which involved getting on news programs and talking about the symposium. Even though
Wow.
even though nobody could actually join us, they could certainly understand why there were crowds of artists all over Chicago.
Well, if people like to draw, it makes them maybe want to get into urban sketching or find a chapter near them too.
Yeah, I remember I was covering one of the workshops that was right near Calder's Flamingo, which is
Mm-hmm.
one of the sculptures in the loop.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sketching, and then there's all these other people in the workshop that are sketching. And then I heard these two people walk by, and they go, "See, those are the same artists that we saw over by the Bean."
Well, that probably made it an exciting trip for people visiting. I mean, that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and on that note, I think we can end it. What are your socials? Where can people find your work? And do you have the symposium work? Do you have it collected on your website so somebody can review it if they wanted to?
I should put it on my website. It's still on the Urban Sketchers global site. If you go to urbansketchers.org and then you search 2017 symposium, there's a section there where they have the sketches
Awesome.
still posted. So in fact, I lost track of where my sketches were, you know, which books they were in. So I ended up going to that website in order to find all the sketches that we did.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
it was a pretty fun event. I'm on Instagram, so you can find me at Wheels317.
Mm-hmm.
Wheels doesn't, you know, you were talking before about don't use your real name on Instagram, and that was my version of it. But Wheels actually has the word Wes in there, so
That's
that's
pretty
why
awesome.
and also because when I was younger, I was a fast runner, and in baseball or softball, when you play softball, if you look like the kind of person that's going to steal the base, they
Uh-huh.
they they will say wheels on first, wheels on first. So it alerts the other players to come in close to the base so that they can throw me out.
Cool.
So that's where the wheels came from.
Uh,
And then I have a website which is still it's a mess, but it still has a lot of my work in it. It's sketchnography
mm-hmm.
at blogspot.com.
Okay, yeah, and these I'll put them in the notes too so people can find them.
Yeah, I'll
And
get you the real address. It's obviously one that I don't go to myself very often, but I put a lot of more of my design work, not as much my sketch. Most of my sketches are in Instagram.
mhm. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. It was really an interesting conversation.
Well, thank you. I had a lot of fun. I was looking forward to this for a very long time.